What if I told you that everything you believe about wealth is wrong? That the reason you're not rich has nothing to do with your intelligence, your education, or even your circumstances, but everything to do with how your mind has been programmed to think about money? What if I told you that there are specific psychological patterns, mental frameworks, and cognitive strategies that wealthy people use every single day, but they never talk about them publicly because keeping these secrets gives them a massive advantage over everyone else? You see, there's a reason why the rich keep getting richer while the middle class stays stuck, spinning their wheels, working harder and harder, but never actually building real wealth. It's not because wealthy people are inherently smarter or more talented. It's because they think differently. They operate from a completely different psychological framework, one that most people never even know exists. The truth is, your relationship with money isn't about money at all. It's about psychology. It's about the unconscious beliefs, fears, and mental patterns that either propel you toward wealth or keep you trapped in financial mediocrity. And here's the thing that will blow your mind. These psychological patterns can be learned, rewired, and mastered by anyone willing to do the mental work. But here's why most people will never discover these secrets. The wealthy don't want you to know how they really think. They don't want you to understand the psychological games they play, the mental models they use, or the cognitive advantages they've developed. Because if everyone knew these strategies, if everyone understood the real psychology of wealth, then their advantage would disappear. So they keep these strategies hidden. They talk about hard work and persistence and following your passion, but they never reveal the deeper psychological principles that actually create wealth. They give you surface-level advice while operating from psychological frameworks that give them an unfair advantage in every financial decision they make. But today that changes. Today you're going to learn the psychological cheat codes that the wealthy use to build and maintain their fortunes. You're going to discover the mental patterns that separate the rich from everyone else, and more importantly, you're going to learn how to rewire your own mind to think like they do. By the time you finish listening to this, you will never think about money the same way again. You'll understand why you've been struggling financially, why your current strategies aren't working, and exactly what you need to change in your thinking to start building real wealth. This isn't about getting rich quick or finding some magic formula. This is about fundamental psychological transformation. Because here's the truth. Wealth isn't created by what you do. Wealth is created by how you think, and once you master the psychology of the wealthy, everything else becomes possible. Chapter 1. The Great Deception. Before we dive into the psychology of wealth, you need to understand something that will shock you. Everything you've been taught about money is designed to keep you poor. I know that sounds extreme, but stay with me. Because once you see this pattern, you can never unsee it. From the moment you were born, you were programmed with beliefs about money that virtually guarantee you'll never build real wealth. These beliefs didn't come from evil conspirators in dark rooms. They came from well-meaning parents, teachers, and society itself. But the result is the same. A population of people who are psychologically programmed to stay financially average. Think about the messages you heard growing up. Money doesn't buy happiness. Money is the root of all evil. Rich people are greedy and selfish. You have to work hard for money. Money doesn't grow on trees. The love of money corrupts people. Rich people got lucky or inherited their wealth. You can't be spiritual and wealthy at the same time. Every single one of these beliefs creates psychological barriers to wealth. They program your subconscious mind to reject, sabotage, or feel guilty about pursuing financial success. And here's the insidious part. These beliefs feel virtuous. They make you feel like a good person for not caring about money, for not being greedy, for being content with less. But while you're feeling virtuous about your modest financial goals, there's a small group of people who learned a completely different set of beliefs about money. They learned that money is a tool for freedom and impact. They learned that wealth allows you to help more people and create more value in the world. They learned that financial success is not about greed, but about mastery, strategy, and psychological discipline. These people don't feel guilty about wanting wealth. They don't apologize for their success. They don't downplay their ambitions. And most importantly, they don't operate from the limiting beliefs that keep everyone else stuck. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The wealthy don't just have different beliefs about money. They have different psychological patterns around risk, opportunity, time, and decision-making. They've developed cognitive frameworks that allow them to see possibilities where others see problems, to take calculated risks while others play it safe, and to think in decades while others think in days. But these psychological differences weren't innate. They were learned. And if they can be learned, they can be taught. That's exactly what we're going to do. The first thing you need to understand is that your current financial situation is not a reflection of your worth, your intelligence, or your potential. It's a reflection of your psychology. Change your psychology and you change your financial reality. It's that simple and that profound. But changing your psychology isn't easy because you're not just fighting against your own limiting beliefs. You're fighting against an entire system designed to keep you thinking small. Every advertisement telling you to buy things you don't need with money you don't have. Every news story about economic uncertainty designed to make you afraid to take risks. Every social message that equates wealth with moral corruption. The wealthy understand this psychological warfare, and they've developed immunity to it. They've learned to think independently, to filter out the noise, and to make decisions based on logic and opportunity, rather than fear and social conditioning. So before we go any further, you need to make a decision. Are you ready to question everything you believe about money? Are you ready to discover that some of your most cherished beliefs about wealth might be holding you back? Are you ready to think like the wealthy think, even if it means going against everything you've been taught? Because that's what it's going to take. The psychology of wealth isn't just different from what most people believe. It's often the complete opposite. Where most people see risk, the wealthy see opportunity. Where most people see problems, the wealthy see solutions. Where most people see limitations, the wealthy see possibilities. This isn't about becoming greedy or losing your values. This is about recognizing that your current financial beliefs might not be serving you, and being open to adopting new mental frameworks that actually create wealth rather than repel it. The wealthy don't want you to know these psychological principles because knowledge is power and financial knowledge is financial power. They prefer to keep these strategies within their own circles, passing them down through generations, while everyone else struggles with outdated and counterproductive beliefs about money. But you're not everyone else. You're here because you're ready to think differently. You're ready to learn the psychological cheat codes that create wealth. And once you master these mental frameworks, you'll wonder how you ever thought any other way. So let's begin with the most fundamental psychological difference between the wealthy and everyone else: their relationship with scarcity and abundance. Chapter 2: The Scarcity Prison. Right now, as you're listening to this, there's a war happening in your mind. It's a war between two fundamental ways of viewing the world: scarcity and abundance. And depending on which side wins this war, you will either build wealth or remain financially stuck for the rest of your life. Most people, without even realizing it, operate from a scarcity mindset. This isn't their fault. Scarcity thinking is programmed into us from childhood through evolutionary biology, social conditioning, and economic fear-mongering. But here's what most people don't understand. Scarcity thinking is the single greatest barrier to wealth creation. When you operate from scarcity, you believe there's not enough to go around. Not enough money, not enough opportunities, not enough success for everyone. This belief creates a psychological framework where you're constantly competing, hoarding, and playing defense, rather than creating value and expanding possibilities. Scarcity thinking shows up in subtle but devastating ways. You negotiate harder to save a few dollars, while missing opportunities to make thousands. You focus on cutting expenses rather than increasing income. You avoid risks that could multiply your wealth because you're terrified of losing what little you have. You feel threatened by other people's success because you believe their gain means your loss. But here's where it gets really insidious. Scarcity thinking creates what psychologists call a scarcity loop. When you believe resources are limited, you make decisions based on fear rather than opportunity. These fear-based decisions typically lead to smaller results, which then confirm your belief that resources are indeed scarce. This creates more fear, more conservative decisions, and more limited results. You get trapped in a cycle of self-fulfilling scarcity. The wealthy, on the other hand, operate from an abundance mindset. This doesn't mean they're naive or reckless. It means they understand a fundamental truth about wealth creation. Money is not a finite resource. Wealth can be created, expanded, and multiplied. The economy is not a zero-sum game where someone has to lose for you to win. When you truly understand abundance thinking, everything changes. Instead of competing for a limited pie, you focus on making the pie bigger. Instead of hoarding money, you invest it to create more money. Instead of fearing other people's success, you study it and learn from it. Instead of playing defense with your finances, you play offense. But abundance thinking goes deeper than just believing there's enough money to go around. It's a complete psychological framework that affects how you make decisions, how you view opportunities, and how you interact with the world. Abundant thinkers ask different questions. Instead of, how can I save money? They ask, how can I make more money? Instead of, what if I lose everything? They ask, what if this works beyond my wildest dreams? Instead of, I can't afford this, they ask, how can I afford this? These different questions lead to completely different actions, which lead to completely different results. Scarcity questions lead to contraction, fear, and missed opportunities. Abundance questions lead to expansion, growth, and wealth creation. Now here's the psychological cheat code that wealthy people understand. Abundance thinking isn't just a mindset. It's a strategic advantage. When you operate from abundance, you make better decisions because you're not paralyzed by fear. You take calculated risks because you understand that the potential upside far outweighs the downside. You invest in yourself and your future because you believe in your ability to create value. But most importantly, abundance thinking allows you to see opportunities that scarcity thinkers can't see. When everyone else is focused on what they might lose, you're focused on what you might gain. When everyone else is playing it safe, you're positioning yourself for exponential growth. This is why wealthy people seem to have all the luck. They don't have more luck. They have more psychological clarity. They're not distracted by scarcity fears, so they can see opportunities that others miss. They're not paralyzed by worst-case scenarios, so they can act when others hesitate. But here's the challenge. You can't just decide to think abundantly. Scarcity thinking is deeply embedded in your subconscious mind through years of conditioning. You need to actively rewire these patterns through conscious practice and repeated exposure to abundance principles. The first step is becoming aware of your scarcity thoughts. Notice when you think there's not enough time, money, or opportunity. Notice when you feel threatened by other people's success. Notice when you make decisions based on what you might lose rather than what you might gain. The second step is challenging these thoughts with abundance alternatives. When you catch yourself thinking, I can't afford this, replace it with, how can I afford this? When you think, there's too much competition, replace it with, competition validates that there's a market. The third step is surrounding yourself with abundance thinkers. Your psychology is heavily influenced by the people around you. If you're surrounded by people who complain about money, who believe the system is rigged, who think wealthy people are evil, Their scarcity thinking will infect your own mind. The wealthy understand this, which is why they're very careful about who they spend time with. They surround themselves with other people who think abundantly, who see opportunities everywhere, who believe in expansion and growth. This isn't snobbery. It's psychological strategy. Because here's what most people don't realize. Your financial results are directly correlated with your psychological environment. If you want to think like wealthy people, you need to immerse yourself in their psychological frameworks. You need to study how they think, how they make decisions, and how they view the world. This brings us to one of the most powerful psychological tools wealthy people use, the ability to see money not as a scarce resource to be hoarded, but as an abundant tool to be leveraged. This fundamental shift in perception changes everything about how you approach wealth creation. When you see money as scarce, you try to accumulate it and hold on to it. When you see money as abundant, you focus on circulation, investment, and multiplication. Wealthy people understand that money sitting in a savings account is actually losing value due to inflation. They understand that the greatest risk isn't losing money, it's missing opportunities to grow money. This is why wealthy people are comfortable with debt when it's used to acquire appreciating assets. This is why they invest in businesses, real estate, and other vehicles that generate passive income. They understand that the goal isn't to have money, it's to have money working for you. But this level of thinking is only possible when you've broken free from the scarcity prison. As long as you're focused on not losing what you have, you'll never focus on multiplying what you have. As long as you're paralyzed by fear of financial loss, you'll never take the calculated risks necessary for financial gain. The wealthy have mastered the psychological balance between prudence and boldness. They're not reckless, but they're not paralyzed by fear either. They understand that the greatest risk is not taking any risks at all. This psychological framework allows them to make decisions that seem impossible to scarcity thinkers. They'll spend money to make money. They'll take on debt to acquire assets. They'll invest in opportunities that have uncertain outcomes, but unlimited upside potential. And here's the key. These aren't just financial strategies. They're psychological strategies. They require a complete rewiring of how you think about money, risk, and opportunity. They require breaking free from the scarcity programming that keeps most people financially stuck. So the question becomes, are you ready to escape the scarcity prison? Are you ready to see money not as a limited resource to be hoarded, but as an unlimited tool to be leveraged? Are you ready to make decisions based on potential gain rather than potential loss? Because once you make this psychological shift, everything else becomes possible. And the first place this shift becomes apparent is in how you perceive and handle risk. Which brings us to our next psychological cheat code. Chapter 3. The Risk Illusion. If you want to understand the psychology of wealth, you need to understand how wealthy people think about risk, because their relationship with risk is completely different from what most people believe, and this difference is one of the most powerful psychological advantages they possess. Most people have been programmed to believe that risk equals danger. They've been taught that the safest path is the best path, that security should be prioritized over opportunity, and that taking risks is essentially gambling with your future. This programming creates a psychological framework where risk is the enemy, something to be avoided at all costs. But here's what the wealthy understand that others don't. The biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. In a world where inflation erodes the purchasing power of money, where technology disrupts entire industries overnight, where economic conditions change rapidly, playing it safe is actually the most dangerous strategy you can pursue. While most people are trying to avoid risk, wealthy people are trying to understand risk, calculate risk, and manage risk. They don't see risk as something to be eliminated. They see it as something to be leveraged for exponential returns. This fundamental difference in risk perception creates completely different life strategies. Average people work to minimize risk. They choose stable jobs, save money in low-interest accounts, avoid debt, and stick to proven paths. Wealthy people work to optimize risk. They choose opportunities with asymmetric risk-reward ratios. They leverage other people's money. They invest in appreciating assets. And they create multiple income streams. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Most people's perception of risk is completely backwards. They think working for someone else is safer than working for themselves, but they have no control over layoffs or company failures. They think saving money is safer than investing it, but inflation guarantees their purchasing power will decrease over time. They think avoiding debt is safer than using debt strategically, but they miss opportunities to leverage other people's money for wealth creation. The wealthy have learned to distinguish between different types of risk. There's financial risk, which can be calculated and managed. There's opportunity risk, which is the cost of missing chances for growth. And there's systemic risk, which comes from relying on systems outside your control. Most people focus exclusively on financial risk, while ignoring opportunity risk and systemic risk. They're so afraid of losing money that they miss chances to make money. They're so focused on protecting what they have that they never position themselves to get what they want. Wealthy people, on the other hand, are much more concerned with opportunity risk. They understand that the opportunities you don't take cost you far more than the money you might lose on calculated risks. They'd rather take 10 calculated risks and have 7 fail than take no risks at all and miss the 3 that could have changed their lives. This creates a psychological phenomenon that separates the wealthy from everyone else. They become comfortable with uncertainty. While most people need guarantees before they'll act, wealthy people act despite uncertainty. They understand that uncertainty creates opportunity, and that the people willing to act without guarantees are the ones who capture the greatest rewards. But this comfort with uncertainty isn't recklessness. It's based on a sophisticated understanding of probability, diversification, and risk management. Wealthy people don't take stupid risks. They take calculated risks with asymmetric reward potential. An asymmetric risk is one where the potential upside far exceeds the potential downside. For example, starting a business might cost you $10,000 and a year of your time, but if it succeeds, it could generate millions in value. The risk is limited and quantifiable, but the reward is potentially unlimited. Wealthy people actively seek out asymmetric risk opportunities while most people avoid them. This is because wealthy people have trained themselves to focus on potential rewards, while most people focus on potential losses. This difference in focus creates completely different decision-making patterns. When a wealthy person evaluates an opportunity, they ask, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? Can I handle the worst case? Is the best case worth the risk? When an average person evaluates the same opportunity, they focus almost exclusively on what could go wrong, what they might lose, and all the reasons why it might not work. This psychological difference in focus determines everything. Where you focus your attention determines what you see, what you feel, and ultimately what you do. Focus on what you might lose, and you'll be paralyzed by fear. Focus on what you might gain, and you'll be motivated by possibility. But the psychology of risk goes even deeper than this. Wealthy people understand something that most people never learn. Your comfort zone is your danger zone. Every day you stay in your comfort zone is a day you're not growing, not learning, and not positioning yourself for greater success. The psychological concept of homeostasis explains why most people resist change and avoid risk. Your brain is wired to maintain the status quo, to keep you safe and comfortable, even if safe and comfortable means financially struggling. Your subconscious mind would rather keep you in familiar misery than push you toward unfamiliar opportunity. Wealthy people have learned to override this psychological programming. They've trained themselves to become comfortable with discomfort. to seek out challenges rather than avoid them, and to view uncertainty as opportunity rather than threat. This requires a complete rewiring of your relationship with failure. Most people are terrified of failure because they see it as evidence of their inadequacy. Wealthy people see failure as education, as market feedback, and as a necessary step towards success. This psychological reframe changes everything. When you're not afraid of failure, you're not afraid of risk. When you see failure as learning rather than losing, you're willing to experiment, to try new approaches, and to take calculated chances that others won't take. The wealthy have also learned to distinguish between reversible and irreversible risks. A reversible risk is one where you can go back to where you started if things don't work out. An irreversible risk is one where failure means permanent loss. Most people treat all risks as irreversible, which paralyzes them from taking action. Wealthy people focus on taking reversible risks with unlimited upside potential. They'll quit their job to start a business because they know they can always get another job if the business fails. They'll invest money in opportunities because they know they can always make more money if the investment doesn't work out. This psychological framework allows them to act boldly while most people act cautiously. And in a rapidly changing world, bold action creates wealth, while cautious action maintains mediocrity. But perhaps the most important aspect of how wealthy people think about risk is that they don't try to eliminate it. They try to transfer it. They use insurance to transfer personal risk. They use corporations to transfer business risk. They use other people's money to transfer investment risk. They use systems and processes to transfer operational risk. This risk transfer strategy allows them to take larger positions and pursue bigger opportunities than they could if they were bearing all the risk themselves. It's a sophisticated form of leverage that multiplies their capacity for wealth creation. Most people, on the other hand, try to bear all the risk themselves. They use their own money for everything. They personally guarantee their business debts, and they try to control every aspect of their financial lives. This approach feels safer, but it actually limits their capacity for wealth creation and exposes them to greater long-term risk. The psychological shift required to think about risk like wealthy people is profound. It requires moving from a fear-based mindset to an opportunity-based mindset. It requires developing comfort with uncertainty and discomfort with stagnation. It requires seeing failure as education rather than evidence of inadequacy. But most importantly, it requires understanding that in a rapidly changing world, the greatest risk is not changing with it. The greatest risk is staying the same while everything around you evolves. The greatest risk is playing it safe while others are positioning themselves for exponential growth. This brings us to one of the most powerful psychological tools wealthy people use to manage risk and create wealth: the concept of calculated speculation, which leads us to our next psychological cheat code. Chapter 4: The Leverage Mindset. Here's a truth that will fundamentally change how you think about wealth creation. Every wealthy person understands leverage, while most poor and middle-class people are terrified of it. This isn't just a financial difference. It's a psychological difference that separates those who build wealth from those who struggle financially their entire lives. When most people hear the word leverage, they think debt, and when they think debt, they feel fear. They've been programmed to believe that debt is bad, that owing money is dangerous, and that financial independence means owing nothing to anyone. This programming creates a psychological prison that keeps them trapped in their own limited resources. But wealthy people understand that leverage isn't about debt. It's about multiplication. Leverage is any tool, strategy, or resource that allows you to achieve more with less personal effort, time, or money. And once you master the psychology of leverage, you'll understand why the wealthy keep getting wealthier while others struggle to get ahead. There are several types of leverage that wealthy people use systematically, and each one requires a specific psychological framework to master. The first type is financial leverage, which means using other people's money to acquire assets or fund opportunities. Most people are terrified of this concept because they focus on what they owe rather than what they own. They see debt as a burden rather than a tool. Wealthy people have a completely different psychological relationship with debt. They distinguish between good debt and bad debt. Bad debt is money borrowed to buy depreciating assets or consumption items. Good debt is money borrowed to acquire appreciating assets or income-generating opportunities. When a wealthy person borrows money to buy rental real estate, they're not thinking about the debt. They're thinking about the asset. They understand that if they buy the right property at the right price with the right financing terms, the asset will generate enough income to service the debt while appreciating in value over time. The debt becomes a tool for wealth creation rather than a source of financial stress. This psychological shift is crucial because it allows wealthy people to control assets that they couldn't afford to buy outright. A person with $100,000 can either buy one property for cash or use that money as down payments to control 5 properties with financing. The leveraged approach creates 5 times the potential for income generation and appreciation. But financial leverage requires psychological discipline. You need to be able to handle the stress of owing money while focusing on the long-term wealth creation potential. You need to be able to analyze deals objectively without being clouded by fear, and you need to understand cash flow, market cycles, and risk management. The second type of leverage is time leverage, which means using other people's time to achieve your goals. Most people are stuck in a time for money exchange where they can only earn when they're working. Wealthy people understand that there are only 24 hours in a day, and if you want to create unlimited wealth, you need to leverage other people's time. This requires a complete psychological shift from doing everything yourself to building systems and teams. Most people resist this because they believe they can do everything better themselves. They don't want to spend money on help, or they're afraid of losing control. Wealthy people overcome these psychological barriers by understanding that their time is their most valuable asset. Every hour they spend on low-value activities is an hour they're not spending on high-value wealth creation. They're willing to pay other people to handle tasks that others can do, so they can focus on activities that only they can do. This creates a multiplication effect where their efforts generate exponentially more results. Instead of one person working 40 hours a week, they might have 10 people working on their behalf, creating 400 hours of productive effort per week. But time leverage requires developing leadership skills, systems thinking, and the ability to delegate effectively. It requires trusting other people with important tasks and being comfortable with not controlling every detail of execution. The third type of leverage is knowledge leverage, which means using specialized knowledge to create disproportionate value. In the information age, the right knowledge applied at the right time can create enormous wealth with minimal resources. Wealthy people are obsessed with acquiring knowledge that gives them an edge in their chosen field. They invest heavily in education, mentoring, and specialized training because they understand that knowledge leverage has unlimited potential. A software programmer who understands artificial intelligence can create applications worth millions of dollars with just a laptop and internet connection. An investor who understands market cycles can time purchases and sales to maximize returns. An entrepreneur who understands psychology can create marketing messages that generate massive sales. The psychological barrier that keeps most people from developing knowledge leverage is that they underestimate the value of specialized knowledge. They think information should be free. They resist investing in education. And they try to figure everything out themselves rather than learning from experts who have already solved the problems they're facing. Wealthy people have a completely different relationship with knowledge. They see specialized knowledge as the highest return investment they can make. They're willing to pay premium prices for the right information at the right time because they understand that one insight can pay for decades of education. The fourth type of leverage is network leverage, which means using relationships to create opportunities that wouldn't be available to you individually. The most successful people in any field understand that your network determines your net worth, and they invest significant time and energy in building relationships with other successful people. This isn't about using people or being manipulative. It's about creating mutually beneficial relationships where everyone benefits from the association. Wealthy people understand that business is fundamentally about relationships, and that the right relationships can create opportunities that no amount of individual effort could generate. But network leverage requires overcoming several psychological barriers. Many people are too proud to ask for help, too scared to reach out to successful people, or too focused on what they can get rather than what they can give. Wealthy people approach networking with an abundance mindset. They look for ways to create value for others before asking for anything in return. They understand that the best networkers are the best connectors, and that helping other people achieve their goals is the fastest way to achieve your own goals. The fifth type of leverage is technology leverage, which means using tools, systems, and automation to multiply your effectiveness. In the digital age, the right technology can allow one person to accomplish what previously required dozens of people. Most people use technology for consumption and entertainment. Wealthy people use technology for creation and multiplication. They invest in tools that automate routine tasks, systems that scale their businesses, and platforms that reach larger audiences. The psychological shift required for technology leverage is moving from being a technology consumer to being a technology creator. This requires learning new skills, investing in better tools, and thinking systematically about how technology can multiply your efforts. But perhaps the most important aspect of the leverage mindset is understanding compound effects. Each type of leverage multiplies the others, creating exponential rather than linear growth. When you combine financial leverage with time leverage, you can control large assets while having other people manage them. When you add knowledge leverage, you can make better decisions about which assets to acquire and when. When you include network leverage, you get access to deals and opportunities that aren't available to the general public. When you incorporate technology leverage, you can analyze more opportunities and manage more assets with less personal effort. This is why wealthy people keep getting wealthier at an accelerating rate. They're not just working harder. They're working with increasing levels of leverage that multiply their efforts exponentially. The psychological barrier that keeps most people from developing a leverage mindset is that leverage requires giving up some control in exchange for multiplication. You have to be comfortable with other people handling important aspects of your wealth creation. You have to trust systems and processes, rather than trying to control every detail yourself. This requires developing what psychologists call a growth mindset, rather than a control mindset. A control mindset focuses on protecting what you have and maintaining personal control over every aspect of your financial life. A growth mindset focuses on creating more by leveraging resources beyond your individual capacity. The wealthy understand that you can't control your way to wealth, but you can leverage your way to wealth. They're willing to give up some control in exchange for exponential growth, while most people insist on maintaining complete control, even if it means staying financially limited. This psychological shift from control to leverage is one of the most difficult but most important mental changes you can make. It requires trusting other people, investing in systems, and being comfortable with complexity rather than simplicity. But once you master the leverage mindset, you'll understand why wealthy people can create more wealth in a year than most people create in a lifetime. It's not because they're inherently superior. It's because they've learned to multiply their efforts through leverage, while others are limited to their individual capacity. This brings us to our next psychological cheat code: how wealthy people think about time, which is fundamentally different from how most people approach temporal decision-making. Chapter 5. The Time Paradox. Time is the one resource that everyone has equally. Yet wealthy people seem to get dramatically more value from their time than everyone else. This isn't because they have more hours in their day or because they're naturally more productive. It's because they have a fundamentally different psychological relationship with time that allows them to create exponential results, while others create linear results. Most people think about time in terms of hours, days, and weeks. They focus on immediate productivity, short-term goals, and instant gratification. Wealthy people think about time in terms of decades, generations, and compound effects. They focus on long-term positioning, exponential growth, and delayed gratification that creates massive future rewards. This difference in temporal thinking creates completely different decision-making patterns. When an average person makes a decision, they ask, "What will this cost me today?" Or, "How will this benefit me this month?" When a wealthy person makes the same decision, they ask, "How will this position me in 5 years?" Or, "What compound effects will this create over the next decade?" This temporal perspective shift changes everything about how you approach wealth creation. Instead of optimizing for immediate income, you optimize for long-term wealth. Instead of focusing on current expenses, you focus on future earning potential. Instead of protecting your current lifestyle, you invest in your future capacity. But the psychology of time goes much deeper than just thinking long-term. Wealthy people understand something that most people never learn. Time is not linear when it comes to wealth creation. The value of your time increases exponentially as you develop skills, build systems, and create leverage. When you're starting out, your time might be worth $20 an hour, but as you develop expertise, build a reputation, and create systems, your time might become worth $200 an hour, then $2,000 an hour, and eventually, if you build the right systems, your wealth can grow even when you're not working at all. This understanding creates a completely different approach to time allocation. Instead of trying to fill every hour with productive activity, wealthy people focus on activities that increase the future value of their time. They invest time in learning skills that will pay dividends for decades. They build relationships that will create opportunities for years. They develop systems that will generate income without their ongoing involvement. Most people, on the other hand, are trapped in what psychologists call temporal myopia. They can only see the immediate consequences of their actions. They choose activities based on immediate rewards rather than long-term value creation. They work for immediate income rather than investing time in activities that could create passive income streams. This temporal myopia is reinforced by modern society, which is designed around instant gratification. Social media gives you immediate dopamine hits. Consumer culture encourages immediate purchases. The employment system pays you for immediate productivity rather than long-term value creation. Wealthy people have learned to resist these psychological pressures and maintain a long-term perspective even when it means short-term sacrifice. They'll spend months learning a skill that won't pay off for years. They'll invest money in assets that won't generate income immediately, but will create wealth over time. They'll build businesses that operate at a loss initially, but have the potential for exponential growth. This ability to delay gratification is one of the most powerful psychological advantages wealthy people possess. While others are focused on immediate rewards, they're positioning themselves for exponential future rewards. While others are optimizing for comfort today, they're optimizing for freedom tomorrow. But delayed gratification isn't just about willpower or discipline. It's about having a clear vision of the future that's so compelling, it makes present sacrifices feel worthwhile. Wealthy people don't delay gratification because they hate pleasure. They delay gratification because they have a vision of future pleasure that's far greater than anything they could experience today. This brings us to another crucial aspect of how wealthy people think about time. They understand the concept of time arbitrage. While most people think about trading time for money, wealthy people think about investing time to create systems that generate money without additional time investment. A wealthy person might spend 6 months building a business system that generates passive income for decades. An average person sees this as 6 months of unpaid work. A wealthy person sees this as trading 6 months of time for decades of freedom. This psychological framework allows wealthy people to make investments in time that others won't make. They'll spend years learning about real estate so they can make better investment decisions. They'll invest months in building relationships that could lead to business opportunities. They'll dedicate time to understanding market cycles so they can time their investments more effectively. The compound effect of these time investments creates what wealthy people call earning while sleeping. Once you've built the right systems, developed the right skills, and established the right relationships, your wealth can grow without your active involvement. Your money works for you instead of you working for money. But achieving this requires a fundamental psychological shift in how you value different types of activities. Most people value activities based on immediate income generation. Wealthy people value activities based on long-term wealth creation potential. This means wealthy people will often choose activities that generate no immediate income but have unlimited long-term potential over activities that generate immediate income but have limited long-term potential. They'll choose to build a business over working for someone else, even if the business generates less income initially. They'll choose to invest in appreciating assets over spending money on depreciating purchases, even if the assets don't provide immediate enjoyment. This temporal arbitrage creates an interesting psychological phenomenon. Wealthy people often appear less productive in the short term, but dramatically more productive in the long term. While others are busy with activities that generate immediate results, wealthy people are building foundations for exponential future results. The psychological challenge is that this approach requires tolerance for uncertainty and delayed feedback. When you're building long-term wealth, you often don't know if your strategies are working until years later. You have to maintain confidence in your approach, despite lack of immediate validation. This is why wealthy people develop what psychologists call process confidence, rather than outcome dependence. They focus on following proven processes, rather than obsessing over immediate outcomes. They trust that if they consistently apply the right strategies over time, the results will eventually compound into significant wealth. Another crucial aspect of how wealthy people think about time is that they understand the concept of time scarcity at a psychological level. While everyone has the same 24 hours, wealthy people act as if their time is extremely valuable because they know it is. This creates a psychological urgency that drives them to optimize every aspect of their time usage. They're ruthless about eliminating time-wasting activities. They delegate tasks that others can do so they can focus on activities that only they can do. They systemize repetitive processes so they don't have to spend time on routine decisions. They invest in tools and technology that save time even if they cost money up front. This time optimization isn't about being busy or stressed. It's about being intentional with time allocation so that more time can be spent on high-value activities or personal enjoyment. Wealthy people often have more free time than average people because they've systematized and delegated the routine aspects of their lives. The psychological principle underlying this approach is that time is your most valuable asset because it's the only asset you can't replace. Money can be earned, relationships can be rebuilt, and skills can be learned. But time that's wasted is gone forever. This understanding creates a different emotional relationship with time. Instead of feeling like they have unlimited time to figure things out, wealthy people feel a sense of urgency about maximizing the value of their time. Instead of procrastinating on important decisions, they act quickly when they identify valuable opportunities. But perhaps the most important aspect of how wealthy people think about time is that they understand generational thinking. They don't just think about creating wealth for themselves. They think about creating systems and assets that will benefit their children and grandchildren. This generational perspective changes how they make decisions about investments, business structures, and asset protection. Instead of optimizing for maximum current income, they optimize for sustainable long-term wealth creation. Instead of consuming all their wealth during their lifetime, they focus on building assets that appreciate over generations. This psychological framework creates what economists call patient capital, wealth that can be invested for maximum long-term returns. Rather than needing to generate immediate income, patient capital allows for investment strategies that wouldn't be possible if you needed immediate returns. The psychological shift required to develop this temporal perspective is significant. It requires moving from instant gratification to delayed gratification, from short-term thinking to long-term planning, and from consuming wealth to building wealth systems. But once you master the psychology of time that wealthy people use, you'll understand why they can create more wealth in a decade than most people create in a lifetime. It's not because they work harder or longer. It's because they think about time in a way that creates compound effects rather than linear results. This brings us to one of the most powerful psychological frameworks wealthy people use, compound thinking, which applies the principle of compound interest to every aspect of wealth creation. Chapter 6. The Compound Effect Psychology. If you want to understand the single most important psychological difference between wealthy people and everyone else, you need to understand compound thinking. This is the mental framework that allows wealthy people to create exponential results, while others create linear results. And it's the reason why the rich keep getting richer at an accelerating rate. Most people understand compound interest mathematically. They know that money invested at compound interest grows exponentially over time. But wealthy people understand compound effects psychologically. They apply compound thinking to every aspect of their lives, from skill development to relationship building to business creation. The psychological power of compound thinking is that it changes how you evaluate every decision. Instead of asking, "What will this do for me today?" you ask, "What will this create over time if it compounds?" Instead of optimizing for immediate results, you optimize for systems that improve themselves over time. This psychological shift is profound because it means wealthy people are playing a completely different game than everyone else. While others are focused on linear improvements and immediate results, wealthy people are focused on creating positive feedback loops that accelerate over time. A positive feedback loop is a system where the results of an action create conditions that make future similar actions more effective. Wealthy people actively seek out and create these feedback loops in every area of their financial lives. For example, when a wealthy person builds a business, they're not just thinking about the immediate income the business generates. They're thinking about how the business builds their reputation, develops their skills, creates new relationships, and positions them for even better opportunities in the future. Each success builds on previous successes, creating acceleration rather than just accumulation. When they invest in real estate, they're not just thinking about the rental income and appreciation. They're thinking about how each property teaches them more about real estate markets, builds relationships with agents and contractors, improves their financing capabilities, and positions them to identify and acquire better properties in the future. When they develop a skill, they're not just thinking about the immediate application of that skill. They're thinking about how that skill will open new opportunities, create new income streams, allow them to serve higher value clients, and provide a foundation for developing even more valuable skills. This compound thinking creates what psychologists call success spirals, positive momentum that builds on itself and accelerates over time. The more successful you become, the more opportunities you attract. The more valuable skills you develop, the faster you can develop additional skills. The more wealth you accumulate, the more investment opportunities become available to you. But compound thinking isn't just about positive results. It's also about understanding compound costs. Wealthy people understand that negative patterns also compound over time, which is why they're ruthless about eliminating behaviors, relationships, and investments that create negative compound effects. When an average person has a bad habit, they focus on the immediate cost of that habit. When a wealthy person identifies a bad habit, they calculate the compound cost over time, which is always dramatically higher than the immediate cost. This understanding creates urgency around eliminating negative patterns before they compound into major problems. For example, if you spend $10 a day on coffee, the immediate cost is $300 per month. But if you invest that money in appreciating assets over 30 years, the compound cost could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wealthy people make these calculations instinctively, which is why they're willing to make short-term sacrifices for long-term wealth. The psychological challenge with compound thinking is that compound effects are invisible in the short term, but dramatic in the long term. This creates what researchers call the compound gap, the period where you're applying compound strategies but not yet seeing compound results. During the compound gap, it appears that compound strategies aren't working. Linear strategies produce immediate visible results, while compound strategies appear to produce no results at all. This is why most people abandon compound strategies before they have time to work. Wealthy people have learned to psychologically navigate the compound gap by developing what we call compound faith, the ability to continue applying compound strategies even when you can't see the results yet. This requires a deep understanding of how compound effects work and unwavering confidence in the process. Compound faith is developed through education, experience, and surrounding yourself with other people who understand compound effects. The more you understand the mathematics and psychology of compounding, the easier it becomes to maintain compound behaviors during the gap period. But compound thinking goes beyond just understanding compound effects. It's about actively designing your life to maximize compound benefits. This means choosing activities, relationships, and investments not just for their immediate benefits, but for their potential to create positive feedback loops over time. Wealthy people ask different questions when evaluating opportunities. How could this compound over time? What positive feedback loops could this create? How could success in this area accelerate success in other areas? What systems could I build around this opportunity to maximize compound effects? These questions lead to different choices. Instead of choosing the highest paying job, you might choose the job with the best learning opportunities. Instead of investing all your money in the highest return investment, you might diversify into investments that create different types of compound benefits. Instead of networking just for immediate business opportunities, you might focus on building relationships that could compound over decades. This compound approach to decision-making requires psychological discipline because compound strategies often require short-term sacrifices for long-term benefits. You have to be willing to accept lower immediate returns in exchange for higher compound returns. You have to resist the temptation to optimize for immediate gratification when long-term optimization would create better results. The psychological principle underlying compound thinking is delayed gratification, but it's delayed gratification with a sophisticated understanding of how small actions compound into massive results over time. It's not just about waiting for results. It's about understanding how to create systems that generate accelerating results. One of the most powerful applications of compound thinking is in skill development. Most people try to learn skills for immediate application. Wealthy people develop skills that compound, skills that make other skills easier to learn, skills that create opportunities for developing additional skills, and skills that become more valuable over time. For example, learning to read financial statements isn't just about understanding one company's finances. It's a skill that compounds because it helps you evaluate any investment opportunity, understand any business model, and identify financial patterns across entire industries. Each financial statement you analyze makes you better at analyzing all future financial statements. Similarly, developing negotiation skills doesn't just help you in one negotiation. It's a skill that compounds because it improves every business interaction, increases your confidence in all future negotiations, and creates better outcomes that position you for even better opportunities. Wealthy people actively seek out these compound skills, skills that create leverage across multiple areas of their lives. Instead of developing narrow specializations, they develop broad capabilities that enhance everything else they do. This compound approach to skill development creates what researchers call skill stacking, the combination of multiple compound skills that create exponential rather than additive benefits. A person who develops skills in sales, marketing, finance, and psychology doesn't just have 4 separate skills. They have a combination that's exponentially more valuable than the sum of its parts. The psychological framework that enables compound thinking is what we call systems thinking, rather than event thinking. Event thinking focuses on individual outcomes and immediate results. Systems thinking focuses on the processes that create outcomes and the patterns that generate results over time. When something good happens to a person with event thinking, they feel lucky. When something good happens to a person with systems thinking, they analyze what system created that result and how they can optimize that system to create better results more consistently. When something bad happens to a person with event thinking, they feel unlucky or blame external circumstances. When something bad happens to a person with systems thinking, they look for the systematic causes and modify their systems to prevent similar problems in the future. This systems approach to thinking allows wealthy people to create predictable compound results rather than hoping for lucky breaks. Instead of trying to time markets, they build systems for identifying good investments over time. Instead of trying to find the perfect business opportunity, they develop systems for recognizing and evaluating opportunities consistently. The compound effect of systems thinking is that your decision-making improves over time. Each decision provides feedback that improves your systems, which leads to better future decisions, which generates better results, which provides better feedback for system improvement. This creates a compound learning loop that accelerates your wealth creation capabilities. But perhaps the most important aspect of compound thinking is understanding what wealthy people call compound positioning. This is the practice of making decisions that position you to benefit from multiple compound effects simultaneously. For example, when a wealthy person chooses where to live, they don't just consider the cost or immediate lifestyle benefits, they consider how that location positions them professionally. What investment opportunities are available in that area? What network effects they can access, and how that choice will compound over time. When they choose what business to start, they don't just consider immediate profit potential. They consider how that business will develop their skills, what relationships it will create, how it positions them for future opportunities, and what other businesses or investments it might lead to. This compound positioning approach means that wealthy people are constantly making choices that create multiple streams of compound benefits. Every decision is evaluated not just for its direct benefits, but for its potential to accelerate other areas of their wealth creation. The psychological shift required to develop compound thinking is moving from addition to multiplication, from immediate to eventual, and from simple to compound. It requires developing patience with processes, confidence in systems, and faith in the power of time to multiply well-designed efforts. But once you master compound thinking, you'll understand why wealthy people can create extraordinary results that seem impossible to others. They're not just working harder, they're creating compound systems that multiply their efforts exponentially over time. This brings us to our next psychological cheat code: how wealthy people think about money itself, which is fundamentally different from how most people conceptualize the nature and purpose of money. Chapter 7. The Money Paradigm Shift. Right now, you have a relationship with money. You might not think about it consciously, but every financial decision you make, every emotion you feel about money, and every belief you hold about wealth is part of this relationship. And here's what most people don't understand. Your relationship with money determines your financial results more than any strategy, investment, or opportunity ever could. Most people have a dysfunctional relationship with money. They see money as something outside themselves, something scarce and difficult to obtain, something that creates stress and anxiety, something that good people shouldn't want too much of. These psychological patterns create internal resistance to wealth accumulation that sabotages every external effort to build wealth. Wealthy people have a completely different relationship with money. They see money as a tool, a scorecard, a form of energy that flows toward value creation. They're comfortable with money, confident about earning money, and strategic about using money to create more money. This psychological comfort with money creates internal alignment that accelerates every external wealth creation effort. The first step in developing a wealthy person's relationship with money is understanding what money actually is. Most people think of money as a thing, pieces of paper, numbers in bank accounts, something tangible and finite. Wealthy people understand that money is a symbol, a representation of value created and exchanged, a measurement of the impact you have on other people's lives. This conceptual shift changes everything about how you approach wealth creation. Instead of trying to get money, you focus on creating value. Instead of thinking about what you can take from the market, you think about what you can give to the market. Instead of seeing wealth as something you acquire, you see wealth as something you create. When you understand that money is a symbol of value creation, earning money becomes about serving others rather than serving yourself. The more value you create for other people, the more money flows toward you. The better you solve problems, meet needs, and improve lives, the wealthier you become. This value creation mindset eliminates the psychological guilt that many people feel about wanting wealth. Instead of feeling selfish for wanting money, you realize that creating wealth requires creating value for others. Instead of feeling like wealth accumulation takes away from others, you understand that true wealth creation benefits everyone involved. But the psychology of money goes much deeper than understanding its symbolic nature. Wealthy people have learned to see money as energy rather than matter. Energy flows, moves, and multiplies. Matter sits, accumulates, and depletes. This energy perspective creates a completely different approach to money management. When you see money as energy, you focus on circulation rather than accumulation. You understand that money sitting in savings accounts is stagnant energy that's losing power over time due to inflation. You realize that money invested in appreciating assets or productive businesses is energy that's growing and multiplying. This energy perspective also changes how you think about spending money. Instead of seeing every expenditure as a loss, you evaluate whether each expenditure creates more energy than it consumes. Spending money on education, tools, or opportunities that increase your earning capacity becomes energy multiplication rather than energy depletion. Wealthy people apply this energy thinking to every financial decision. They ask, does this expenditure create more financial energy than it consumes? Does this investment multiply energy or just store it? Does this business decision increase or decrease the flow of financial energy? This energy-based decision-making framework creates a completely different approach to money management than the scarcity-based approach most people use. Instead of trying to conserve and protect money, you focus on circulating and multiplying money. Instead of avoiding all financial risk, you take calculated risks that have the potential to multiply your financial energy. Another crucial aspect of how wealthy people think about money is that they understand the difference between working for money and having money work for them. Most people are trapped in a linear relationship with money where they trade time for money at a fixed rate. Wealthy people create exponential relationships with money where their wealth generates additional wealth without their direct involvement. This requires a fundamental psychological shift from being an employee of money to being an employer of money. Instead of serving money by working for it, you make money serve you by putting it to work, generating returns. But this shift requires developing comfort with complexity rather than simplicity. Having money work for you means understanding investments, business systems, market dynamics, and financial instruments. Most people avoid this complexity and stick to simple strategies that provide security but limited growth. Wealthy people embrace this complexity because they understand that complexity creates opportunity. The more sophisticated your understanding of money and markets, the more opportunities you can identify and capitalize on. The willingness to learn complex financial concepts becomes a competitive advantage that creates wealth over time. This brings us to one of the most important psychological differences in how wealthy people think about money. They see money as infinite rather than finite. Most people operate from the assumption that there's only so much money to go around, which creates competition, hoarding, and zero-sum thinking. Wealthy people understand that money is created, not just distributed. Every time someone solves a problem, creates value, or improves efficiency, new wealth is created. The economy is not a fixed pie where someone has to lose for you to win. It's an expanding system where value creation benefits everyone. This infinite money mindset creates completely different behaviors. Instead of competing for existing money, you focus on creating new money through value creation. Instead of trying to take market share from competitors, you focus on expanding the total market. Instead of hoarding money out of fear of scarcity, you invest money to create abundance. The psychological power of the infinite money mindset is that it eliminates the guilt, fear, and competition that plague most people's relationship with money. You don't have to feel bad about wanting wealth because your wealth creation doesn't take away from others. You don't have to fear losing money because you understand how to create more money. You don't have to compete destructively because you're focused on value creation rather than value capture. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of how wealthy people think about money is that they understand money as a measuring system rather than a goal system. Money becomes a way to measure the value you're creating, the impact you're having, and the effectiveness of your strategies, but it's not the ultimate objective. This measuring system perspective prevents the psychological trap that destroys many people's relationship with money, making money the end goal rather than a means to an end. When money becomes the goal, you start making decisions that optimize for money accumulation rather than value creation, which paradoxically makes it harder to create sustainable wealth. Wealthy people keep money in perspective by maintaining clarity about what money enables, rather than worshiping money itself. Money enables freedom, security, impact, and options, but it's not valuable in itself. This perspective prevents the psychological distortions that come from making money your identity or your primary source of self-worth. The psychological framework that underlies all healthy relationships with money is what we call money neutrality. This means seeing money as neither good nor evil, neither something to be pursued obsessively, nor something to be avoided guiltily. Money is simply a tool, and like any tool, its value depends on how skillfully and ethically you use it. Money neutrality allows you to make rational decisions about money without being clouded by emotional reactions. You can pursue wealth creation strategies without guilt or fear. You can take calculated risks without being paralyzed by potential losses. You can enjoy money without being corrupted by it. But developing money neutrality requires conscious work to identify and eliminate the emotional baggage most people carry about money. You need to examine the beliefs you inherited about money, the fears you've developed around money, and the stories you tell yourself about what money means. Most people have unconscious negative associations with money that sabotage their wealth creation efforts. They believe that wanting money makes them greedy, that having money makes them selfish. that pursuing wealth corrupts their values, or that rich people are inherently bad people. These negative associations create internal resistance to wealth accumulation. Even when you consciously want to build wealth, your subconscious mind will sabotage your efforts if it believes that wealth is inconsistent with being a good person. Wealthy people have learned to eliminate these negative associations by developing a more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between money and morality. They understand that money amplifies who you already are, rather than changing who you are. Good people with money become more generous, more impactful, and more capable of helping others. Bad people with money become more dangerous, but the money doesn't make them bad. This understanding allows wealthy people to pursue wealth creation without moral conflict. They can be aggressive about building wealth while maintaining their ethical standards. They can enjoy their wealth without feeling guilty about others who have less. The final aspect of developing a wealthy person's relationship with money is understanding money as a form of freedom rather than security. Most people pursue money for security, the ability to pay bills, handle emergencies, and maintain their current lifestyle. Wealthy people pursue money for freedom, the ability to make choices based on what they want to do rather than what they have to do. This freedom perspective creates different wealth creation strategies. Instead of accumulating money to feel secure, you build wealth systems that create options. Instead of saving money to protect against future problems, you invest money to create future opportunities. The psychological power of the freedom perspective is that it motivates wealth creation for positive reasons rather than negative reasons. You're building wealth to gain freedom rather than to avoid problems. You're creating financial systems to expand your options rather than to limit your risks. This positive motivation creates sustainable wealth creation habits because you're moving towards something you want rather than away from something you fear. Fear-based motivation is powerful in the short term, but burns out over time. Freedom-based motivation is sustainable because it's aligned with human nature's desire for autonomy and self-determination. When you master the psychological relationship with money that wealthy people have developed, money becomes a powerful tool for creating the life you want rather than a source of stress, guilt, or fear. You become confident about earning money, strategic about using money, and comfortable with having money work for you. This brings us to our next psychological cheat code: how wealthy people think about failure and setbacks, which is completely different from how most people process negative experiences. Chapter 8. The Failure Reframe. If you want to understand one of the most powerful psychological advantages wealthy people possess, you need to understand their relationship with failure. While most people are paralyzed by the fear of failure, wealthy people have learned to see failure as education, feedback, and opportunity. This fundamental difference in how they process setbacks is one of the most important factors in their ability to create wealth consistently. Most people have been programmed to see failure as evidence of inadequacy. From childhood, they're taught that failure means they're not smart enough, not talented enough, or not worthy enough. This programming creates a psychological framework where failure becomes an identity threat rather than a learning opportunity. When most people experience a business failure, investment loss, or financial setback, they internalize it as proof that they're not cut out for wealth creation. They use the failure as evidence that they should stick to safer, more conservative approaches. They let one setback prevent them from taking future risks that could lead to greater success. Wealthy people have a completely different psychological relationship with failure. They see failure as tuition paid to the University of Real-World Education. They understand that every failure contains valuable information that can improve their future decision-making. They view setbacks as market feedback rather than personal inadequacy. This reframe is psychologically powerful because it eliminates the emotional devastation that comes with failure. Instead of feeling shame, inadequacy, or despair when something doesn't work out, they feel curiosity, determination, and even excitement about what they can learn from the experience. But this isn't just positive thinking or psychological denial. Wealthy people have learned to extract maximum value from their failures through systematic analysis and integration. They don't just bounce back from failures. They use failures to become stronger, smarter, and more effective. When a wealthy person experiences a business failure, they conduct what we call a failure autopsy. They analyze every aspect of what went wrong, what assumptions were incorrect, what market signals they missed, what skills they need to develop, what systems failed, and what they would do differently with the same opportunity. This systematic analysis transforms failure from an emotional experience into an educational experience. Instead of dwelling on what they lost, they focus on what they learned. Instead of regretting the experience, they integrate the lessons into their future decision-making frameworks. The psychological principle underlying this approach is what researchers call growth mindset versus fixed mindset. People with a fixed mindset believe their abilities are static and failure indicates fundamental limitations. People with a growth mindset believe their abilities can be developed and failure indicates areas for improvement. Wealthy people operate from an extreme growth mindset. They don't just believe they can improve. They actively seek out experiences that challenge their current capabilities and potentially lead to failure. They understand that the fastest way to develop new capabilities is to attempt things that are currently beyond their skill level. This creates a psychological phenomenon that separates wealthy people from everyone else. They become comfortable with discomfort. While most people avoid situations where they might fail, wealthy people actively seek out situations where failure is possible because that's where the greatest learning and growth opportunities exist. This comfort with discomfort extends beyond just accepting failure to actively embracing uncertainty, challenge, and risk. Wealthy people train themselves to be psychologically comfortable in situations where the outcome is unknown and failure is possible. But the psychology of failure goes even deeper than just accepting setbacks. Wealthy people have learned to distinguish between different types of failure and respond appropriately to each type. The first type is strategic failure, where the overall approach was correct, but the execution or timing was flawed. These failures require tactical adjustments rather than strategic overhauls. A real estate investor who buys in the right market but pays too much has experienced a strategic failure that can be corrected with better analysis and negotiation skills. The second type is systemic failure, where the fundamental approach was flawed and needs to be reconsidered. These failures require more significant learning and strategy modification. An entrepreneur who builds a product that nobody wants has experienced a systemic failure that requires deeper understanding of market needs and customer psychology. The third type is experimental failure, where you deliberately test an approach knowing it might not work. These failures are actually successes because they provide valuable information with minimal cost. A marketer who tests 10 different advertising approaches and finds that 9 don't work has successfully eliminated 9 ineffective strategies while identifying 1 effective strategy. Wealthy people actively create experimental failures because they understand that intelligent experimentation is the fastest way to discover what works. Instead of trying to avoid all failures, they design small failures that provide big insights. This experimental approach to failure requires developing what psychologists call anti-fragility, the ability to become stronger under stress rather than just surviving stress. While most people try to create systems that are resilient to failure, wealthy people create systems that benefit from failure. An anti-fragile investment strategy might include small positions in many high-risk, high-reward opportunities. Most of these positions will fail, but the few that succeed will generate returns that more than compensate for all the failures. The failures aren't just acceptable, they're necessary for the strategy to work. This anti-fragile approach to wealth creation allows wealthy people to take larger positions and pursue bigger opportunities than they could if they were trying to avoid all possibility of failure. They can afford to fail small, and often because they're positioned to win big occasionally. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of how wealthy people think about failure is that they understand the concept of fast failure. Instead of trying to avoid failure or slow down failure, they try to fail as quickly and cheaply as possible when something isn't working. Fast failure means cutting losses quickly rather than hoping that bad situations will improve. It means testing ideas with minimal investment before committing significant resources. It means being willing to admit mistakes early rather than doubling down on failing strategies. This fast failure approach requires overcoming several psychological biases that keep most people trapped in failing situations. The sunk cost fallacy makes people continue investing in failing projects because they've already invested so much. Loss aversion makes people hold on to losing investments, hoping to break even. Confirmation bias makes people ignore evidence that their strategies aren't working. Wealthy people have trained themselves to overcome these psychological biases through systematic decision-making frameworks. They make decisions based on future potential rather than past investment. They cut losses based on objective criteria rather than emotional attachment. They seek out disconfirming evidence rather than just looking for validation of their beliefs. The psychological training required to implement fast failure is significant because it goes against human nature. Our brains are wired to avoid losses, which made sense in survival situations, but creates problems in wealth creation situations where calculated risks and quick pivots are necessary for success. But the most important aspect of how wealthy people think about failure is that they understand failure as a competitive advantage. While their competitors are paralyzed by fear of failure, they're learning from failure. While others are playing it safe to avoid setbacks, they're taking calculated risks that create opportunities for exponential growth. This failure advantage compounds over time. Each failure provides education that improves future decision-making. Each setback builds psychological resilience that enables bigger risks. Each mistake develops pattern recognition that prevents similar mistakes in the future. After enough failures, wealthy people develop what we call failure immunity. They become psychologically comfortable with failure to the point where it no longer limits their actions. They can pursue opportunities aggressively because they're not afraid of the downside. They can make bold decisions because they're confident in their ability to handle whatever happens. This failure immunity becomes a massive psychological advantage because it eliminates the fear-based decision-making that limits most people's wealth creation potential. When you're not afraid of failure, you can focus entirely on maximizing upside potential rather than minimizing downside risk. The reframe from failure as threat to failure as opportunity also changes how wealthy people approach learning and skill development. Instead of only learning from their own experiences, they actively study other people's failures to accelerate their own learning process. They read business case studies that analyze failed companies. They study market crashes to understand what created the conditions for failure. They interview people who have experienced significant setbacks to learn from their experiences without having to live through those setbacks themselves. This vicarious learning from failure allows them to develop wisdom without having to experience every possible type of setback personally. They can learn from decades of other people's failures in a fraction of the time it would take to experience those failures themselves. But perhaps the most powerful psychological tool wealthy people use in relation to failure is what we call pre-mortems, the practice of imagining failure before it happens and developing contingency plans for dealing with potential setbacks. Before making any significant investment or business decision, they systematically consider what could go wrong and how they would respond to each scenario. This mental preparation eliminates the shock and emotional devastation that comes with unexpected failure and allows them to respond more rationally when problems arise. Pre-mortems also help them identify potential problems before they occur and design strategies that minimize the probability of failure or limit the cost of failure if it occurs. This proactive approach to failure management is much more effective than reactive crisis management. The psychological benefit of premortems is that they eliminate much of the fear that paralyzes people when considering risky opportunities. When you've already mentally rehearsed how you would handle failure, the prospect of failure becomes much less frightening. You can pursue opportunities more boldly because you're prepared for various outcomes. When you master the psychological relationship with failure that wealthy people have developed, failure becomes a tool for wealth creation rather than a barrier to wealth creation. You become willing to take the calculated risks necessary for exponential growth, and you develop the psychological resilience necessary to persist through the inevitable setbacks that come with ambitious wealth creation goals. This brings us to our final psychological cheat code in this section: how wealthy people think about and use social dynamics to accelerate their wealth creation, which is perhaps the most sophisticated and misunderstood aspect of wealth psychology. Chapter 9: The Social Leverage Matrix. Here's a truth that will fundamentally change how you think about wealth creation. No one gets rich alone. Every wealthy person understands that wealth is created through relationships, networks, and social systems. While most people focus on individual effort and personal skills, wealthy people focus on social leverage and network effects. This difference in social thinking is one of the most powerful but least understood psychological advantages wealthy people possess. Most people have been conditioned to believe that success comes from individual merit, hard work, and personal achievement. This individualistic programming creates a psychological framework where you try to do everything yourself. You compete against others rather than collaborate with them, and you underestimate the power of relationships in wealth creation. Wealthy people understand that we live in a social economy where relationships, reputation, and network effects determine financial outcomes more than individual capabilities. They know that the right relationship can create more wealth than years of individual effort. They understand that social capital often converts to financial capital more efficiently than any other strategy. This social approach to wealth creation isn't about using people or being manipulative. It's about understanding that value creation in modern economy happens through collaboration, and that the people with the best networks can identify and capitalize on opportunities that others never even see. When a wealthy person approaches any business opportunity, they don't just evaluate the financial potential, they evaluate the social potential. They ask, what relationships will this create? How will this enhance my reputation? What network effects could this generate? How could this position me within valuable social systems? This social evaluation process often leads them to choose opportunities that appear less financially attractive in the short term, but create more social leverage in the long term. They might accept lower immediate compensation for a role that connects them with influential people. They might invest in businesses that operate within valuable networks, even if the immediate returns are modest. This long-term social thinking creates what researchers call network effects, situations where your value increases as the network around you becomes more valuable. The classic example is a telephone. One telephone has no value, but as more people get telephones, each individual telephone becomes more valuable. Wealthy people actively position themselves within networks that have positive network effects. They choose industries, locations, and associations that become more valuable as more successful people join them. They understand that being connected to a valuable network makes you more valuable, which attracts even more valuable connections. But social leverage goes beyond just networking. It's about understanding the psychological principles that govern human relationships and using those principles to create mutually beneficial outcomes. Wealthy people study social psychology not to manipulate others, but to understand how to create value for others in ways that also create value for themselves. One of the most important social psychology principles wealthy people understand is reciprocity. When you create value for someone else, they feel psychologically compelled to create value for you in return. This isn't manipulation. It's how human relationships naturally function. The key is creating genuine value first, rather than expecting value from others. Wealthy people apply this reciprocity principle systematically. They look for ways to help others achieve their goals, solve their problems, or advance their interests. They understand that the more value they create for their network, the more value their network will create for them over time. This value-first approach eliminates the transactional feeling that makes most networking efforts ineffective. Instead of meeting people and immediately asking what they can do for you, you focus on understanding what they need and how you might be able to help them. This creates genuine relationships rather than superficial business connections. Another crucial social psychology principle wealthy people understand is social proof. People are more likely to trust, respect, and do business with individuals who are already trusted and respected by others. This creates a psychological momentum where success attracts more success. Wealthy people actively build social proof by associating with other successful people, contributing to respected institutions, and positioning themselves as experts in their fields. They understand that perception often determines reality in social and business contexts. This focus on social proof creation leads them to make decisions that might seem inefficient from an individual productivity standpoint, but are highly effective from a social leverage standpoint. They might spend time at industry events, write articles for respected publications, or speak at conferences not for immediate financial gain, but for the social proof these activities create. The compound effect of social proof is that it creates what psychologists call authority bias. People automatically assume that someone with social proof knows what they're talking about and can be trusted with important decisions. This authority bias opens doors, creates opportunities, and generates business that would be impossible to create through individual effort alone. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of how wealthy people think about social dynamics is their understanding of what we call social arbitrage, the ability to create value by connecting people and resources that wouldn't otherwise be connected. Social arbitrage requires developing a broad network across different industries, social groups, and geographic locations. When you understand the needs, capabilities, and opportunities within multiple networks, you can identify situations where resources from one network could solve problems in another network. For example, you might know an investor looking for real estate opportunities and a developer who needs funding for a project. By connecting them, you create value for both parties and position yourself for potential involvement in the deal. You might know a company that needs a specific type of expertise and a consultant who provides that expertise. By making the introduction, you help both parties while building social capital with each. This social arbitrage approach requires a different mindset than most people have about networking. Instead of networking to promote yourself, you network to understand what others need so you can connect them with solutions. Instead of trying to extract value from your network, you focus on creating value within your network. The psychological challenge with social leverage is that it requires giving value before receiving value, which goes against the immediate gratification mindset that dominates modern culture. You have to invest time in relationships before those relationships generate financial returns. You have to help others succeed before they can help you succeed. This delayed gratification requirement is why most people never develop effective social leverage. They want immediate returns from their networking efforts, and when those returns don't materialize quickly, they abandon relationship building in favor of strategies that produce more immediate results. Wealthy people understand that social leverage is a long-term strategy that compounds over time. Each valuable relationship you build creates opportunities that lead to more valuable relationships. Each person you help is more likely to help you, and more likely to refer others who might help you. Each piece of value you create for your network increases your reputation and influence within that network. This compound social effect creates what we call network momentum, a situation where your network actively works to identify and present opportunities to you. Instead of having to search for opportunities, opportunities come to you through your network relationships. But achieving network momentum requires more than just meeting people and being helpful. It requires developing what psychologists call social intelligence, the ability to understand social dynamics, read interpersonal situations accurately, and navigate complex relationship networks effectively. Social intelligence includes understanding how different people are motivated, what communication styles they prefer, how they make decisions, and what they value most in business relationships. This understanding allows you to interact with each person in their network in ways that create maximum value and comfort for them. Wealthy people invest significant time in developing social intelligence because they understand that people prefer to do business with people they like, trust, and feel comfortable with. Technical competence might get you considered for opportunities, but social intelligence determines whether you actually get those opportunities. This social intelligence development requires studying psychology, practicing empathy, and developing genuine interest in other people's success. It's not about manipulation or fake charm. It's about becoming someone that others genuinely want to work with and help succeed. Another crucial aspect of social leverage that wealthy people understand is the importance of social positioning. This means consciously choosing the social contexts where you want to be known and respected, and then systematically building your reputation and influence within those contexts. Most people allow their social positioning to happen accidentally, based on where they work, where they live, and who they happen to meet. Wealthy people choose their social positioning strategically based on where they want their career and wealth creation efforts to go. If you want to build wealth through real estate, you position yourself within real estate investment communities. If you want to build wealth through technology, you position yourself within technology and entrepreneurship networks. If you want to build wealth through finance, you position yourself within financial services and investment communities. This strategic social positioning requires being willing to start at the bottom of valuable networks rather than being at the top of less valuable networks. You might have to accept being a small fish in a big pond rather than a big fish in a small pond, but the growth potential is much greater in valuable networks. The psychological challenge with strategic social positioning is that it often requires leaving comfortable social environments where you're already established and respected. You have to be willing to rebuild your reputation and influence in new contexts that offer greater long-term potential. But the most powerful aspect of social leverage is understanding what wealthy people call social amplification, the ability to use social dynamics to multiply the impact of your individual efforts. Social amplification happens when your network starts promoting your ideas, recommending your services, and creating opportunities for you without your direct involvement. This is the ultimate form of social leverage because your influence and opportunities expand beyond your individual capacity to create them. Achieving social amplification requires developing a reputation for creating exceptional value, maintaining high integrity, and helping others succeed. When people have positive experiences working with you, they naturally want to share those experiences with others who might benefit from working with you. This word-of-mouth promotion is more powerful than any marketing or self-promotion you could do because it comes from trusted sources rather than from you directly. People are much more likely to trust recommendations from their network than claims you make about yourself. The compound effect of social amplification is that your opportunities and influence can grow exponentially rather than linearly. Each successful collaboration leads to multiple referrals. Each person you help becomes an advocate who promotes you to their network. Each piece of exceptional value you create generates social capital that creates future opportunities, But social amplification requires a fundamental shift from self-promotion to value creation. Instead of trying to convince people of your value, you focus on demonstrating your value through your actions. Instead of talking about what you can do, you focus on doing exceptional work that speaks for itself. This value demonstration approach requires confidence in your abilities and patience with the process. You have to trust that exceptional work will be recognized and rewarded over time, even if the recognition doesn't come immediately. The psychological framework that enables effective social leverage is what we call abundance networking versus scarcity networking. Scarcity networking is trying to extract value from relationships for your immediate benefit. Abundance networking is creating value within relationships that benefits everyone involved. Abundance networking requires believing that there are enough opportunities for everyone to succeed, that helping others succeed doesn't diminish your own opportunities, and that the best way to advance your own interests is to advance the interests of others. This abundance approach eliminates the competitive transactional feeling that makes most networking efforts uncomfortable and ineffective. When you're genuinely focused on helping others succeed, networking becomes enjoyable and natural rather than stressful and artificial. The final aspect of social leverage that separates wealthy people from everyone else is their understanding of social systems and how to position themselves advantageously within those systems. Every industry, market, and community has social systems that determine how opportunities are distributed, how decisions are made, and how influence flows. Most people operate within these systems without understanding them. Wealthy people study these systems and position themselves to benefit from how they function. This system's understanding allows them to identify the key people, key relationships, and key positions that create disproportionate influence within their chosen fields. Instead of trying to work harder within the system, they work smarter by positioning themselves at points of maximum leverage within the system. This social systems approach to wealth creation is perhaps the most sophisticated psychological tool wealthy people use, and it's the reason why they can often create extraordinary results with what appears to be ordinary effort. They're not working harder than everyone else. They're working within systems that amplify their efforts. When you master the social leverage principles that wealthy people use, you'll understand why networking and relationship building are among the highest return activities you can invest your time in. You'll see why wealthy people often prioritize social capital over financial capital in their early career stages, and why they continue to invest in relationship building even after they've achieved financial success. This brings us to our next psychological cheat code: how wealthy people think about and manage their psychology around money, which involves sophisticated emotional regulation strategies that most people never develop. Chapter 10: The Emotional Intelligence Advantage. If you want to understand why some people can make rational financial decisions while others are controlled by their emotions around money, you need to understand the role of emotional intelligence in wealth creation. Wealthy people have mastered the psychology of emotional regulation when it comes to financial decisions, and this mastery gives them a massive advantage over people who make emotional rather than rational financial choices. Most people are emotional about money. They feel anxiety when they think about investments, fear when they consider taking financial risks, guilt when they spend money on themselves, and stress when they think about their financial future. These emotional reactions cloud their judgment and lead to poor financial decisions that keep them trapped in cycles of financial struggle. Wealthy people have learned to separate their emotions from their financial decisions. This doesn't mean they don't have emotions about money. It means they don't let those emotions control their financial choices. They've developed sophisticated emotional regulation strategies that allow them to make rational decisions, even when they feel emotional about the situation. This emotional regulation isn't natural or easy. The human brain is wired to make emotional decisions about anything related to survival, and money triggers primitive survival responses. Your brain treats financial loss the same way it treats physical threats, which is why losing money feels so devastating and why most people avoid financial risks, even when those risks are mathematically favorable. Wealthy people have learned to override these primitive emotional responses through conscious emotional management techniques. They understand that emotional decisions about money are almost always suboptimal, so they've developed systems for making financial decisions from a logical rather than emotional state. The first emotional regulation strategy wealthy people use is what psychologists call emotional labeling. When they notice themselves having an emotional reaction to a financial situation, they identify and name the emotion rather than being controlled by it. They might say, "I'm feeling anxious about this investment," or "I'm feeling greedy about this opportunity." This labeling process activates the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational part of the brain, and reduces the influence of the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain. Simply naming an emotion reduces its power to control your behavior and creates space for rational analysis. But emotional labeling is just the first step. Wealthy people also practice what we call emotional investigation. Once they've identified an emotion, they explore what's causing it and whether it's providing useful information or just creating noise. For example, if they feel anxious about an investment, they investigate whether the anxiety is based on legitimate concerns about the investment's risk profile or just general discomfort with uncertainty. If it's based on legitimate concerns, they address those concerns through additional research or risk management strategies. If it's just discomfort with uncertainty, they acknowledge the feeling, but don't let it influence their decision. This emotional investigation process allows them to extract useful information from their emotions while avoiding emotional decision-making. Emotions often contain important data about situations, but that data needs to be processed rationally rather than reactively. Another crucial emotional regulation strategy wealthy people use is temporal distancing. When they're feeling emotional about a financial decision, they imagine how they'll feel about the decision in different time frames: 1 month, 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years from now. This temporal distancing helps them distinguish between emotions that are based on immediate discomfort and emotions that reflect genuine long-term concerns. Many financial emotions are based on short-term discomfort, with decisions that are beneficial in the long term. For example, the emotional discomfort of taking on debt to buy rental real estate might be intense in the short term. But when you project forward to how you'll feel in 10 years, when the properties are generating significant passive income, the emotional calculation changes completely. Wealthy people also use a technique called worst-case scenario analysis to manage the fear and anxiety that often paralyze people when making financial decisions. Instead of trying to avoid thinking about what could go wrong, they systematically analyze the worst-case scenarios and develop plans for handling them. This worst-case analysis serves two psychological purposes. First, it often reveals that the worst-case scenarios are less catastrophic than they initially appear. Second, it creates confidence that you can handle whatever happens, which reduces the anxiety that prevents action. When you've mentally rehearsed how you would handle the worst-case scenario, you're no longer paralyzed by uncertainty about what you would do if things go wrong. This preparation eliminates much of the fear that keeps people from taking calculated risks that could significantly improve their financial situation. But perhaps the most important emotional regulation strategy wealthy people use is what we call outcome independence. This means making decisions based on the quality of the decision-making process rather than attachment to specific outcomes. Outcome independence eliminates the emotional roller coaster that comes from tying your self-worth and emotional state to financial results. When you're attached to specific outcomes, every financial setback feels like a personal failure, and every financial success feels like validation of your worth. This emotional attachment to outcomes creates terrible decision-making because you start making choices based on protecting your ego rather than optimizing for long-term wealth creation. You avoid risks that might lead to short-term failures even if they have positive expected values over time. Wealthy people have learned to evaluate their financial decisions based on whether they followed a sound decision-making process, rather than whether the outcome was immediately positive. They understand that good decisions sometimes lead to bad outcomes in the short term, and that bad decisions sometimes lead to good outcomes due to luck. This process focus allows them to learn from their experiences without being emotionally devastated by temporary setbacks. They can analyze what went wrong with a failed investment without feeling like the failure reflects their personal inadequacy. Outcome independence also allows them to remain emotionally stable during both success and failure. They don't get overconfident during winning streaks or devastated during losing streaks. This emotional stability enables better decision-making because they're not trying to compensate for emotional highs or lows. Another sophisticated emotional regulation technique wealthy people use is cognitive reframing. This means consciously changing how they think about financial situations to create more useful emotional responses. For example, instead of thinking about investment losses as failures, they reframe them as tuition paid for market education. Instead of thinking about business expenses as money lost, they reframe them as investments in future income generation. Instead of thinking about networking events as time wasted, they reframe them as relationship buildings that could create future opportunities. This reframing isn't just positive thinking, it's strategic thinking about how to interpret experiences in ways that create useful emotional states rather than destructive emotional states. The same objective situation can create very different emotional responses depending on how you frame it, and those different emotional responses lead to very different future behaviors. Wealthy people also understand the concept of emotional contagion and are very careful about the emotional environment they create and participate in. Emotions are contagious, which means the emotional states of the people around you influence your own emotional state more than you realize. If you're surrounded by people who are anxious about money, fearful about investments, and negative about wealth creation, their emotional states will influence your own emotional states and decision-making. If you're surrounded by people who are confident about money, excited about opportunities, and positive about wealth creation, their emotional states will influence you in more useful directions. This understanding leads wealthy people to be very selective about who they discuss financial matters with and whose financial advice they consider. They seek out advisors, mentors, and peers who have the emotional maturity and emotional regulation skills they want to develop. But the most advanced emotional regulation strategy wealthy people use is what we call meta-emotional awareness. This means being aware of your emotional patterns around money and consciously working to improve those patterns over time. Most people are unconscious of their emotional patterns around money. They react the same way to similar financial situations without realizing they're following predictable emotional scripts. These unconscious patterns often lead to repeated financial mistakes. Wealthy people develop conscious awareness of their emotional patterns around money and work systematically to improve those patterns. They notice when they tend to get anxious, greedy, fearful, or overconfident, and they develop specific strategies for managing those emotional states. This meta-emotional awareness allows them to continuously improve their emotional regulation skills over time. Each financial experience becomes an opportunity to practice better emotional management rather than just an opportunity to make money. The compound effect of superior emotional regulation is that wealthy people make better financial decisions consistently over time, while others are making emotional decisions that feel good in the moment but create poor long-term results. They're making rational decisions that might feel uncomfortable in the moment but create excellent long-term results. This emotional regulation advantage compounds because better financial decisions lead to better financial results, which creates more confidence and emotional stability, which enables even better future decisions. Emotional regulation and financial success create a positive feedback loop that accelerates wealth creation over time. But developing this level of emotional regulation requires conscious practice and often professional development. Most people never learn emotional regulation skills because they're not taught in school and they're not emphasized in traditional financial education. Wealthy people often invest in therapy, coaching, or training specifically focused on emotional regulation and psychological development. They understand that their psychology is their most important wealth creation tool, and they invest in optimizing that tool just as they would invest in optimizing any other business asset. The final aspect of emotional intelligence that gives wealthy people an advantage is their understanding of how emotions affect other people's financial decisions. This allows them to recognize when markets, individuals, or entire industries are making emotional rather than rational decisions, which creates opportunities for people who can remain rational. When everyone else is being greedy during market bubbles, emotionally intelligent investors remain cautious. When everyone else is being fearful during market crashes, emotionally intelligent investors see opportunities. When everyone else is making emotional decisions about business deals, emotionally intelligent negotiators can structure deals that benefit all parties. This emotional market awareness creates what we call contrarian opportunities, situations where you can create wealth by taking rational actions when others are acting emotionally. These opportunities often provide the highest returns because emotional decision-making creates inefficiencies that rational decision-makers can capitalize on. When you master the emotional regulation strategies that wealthy people use, you'll be able to make financial decisions based on logic and long-term optimization rather than fear, greed, or other emotional reactions. This single improvement in your financial psychology can dramatically improve your wealth creation results over time. This brings us to our next psychological cheat code: how wealthy people think about and approach investing, which involves psychological frameworks that are completely different from how most people approach investment decisions. Chapter 11: The Investment Psychology Matrix. The difference between how wealthy people think about investing and how most people think about investing is so profound that they're essentially playing different games entirely. Most people approach investing with a gambling mentality, hoping to pick winners and avoid losers. Wealthy people approach investing with a business mentality, focusing on systems, probabilities, and long-term value creation. This fundamental difference in investment psychology determines everything about their investment results. While most people lose money or generate modest returns, wealthy people consistently generate returns that compound into significant wealth over time. The difference isn't access to better investments. It's understanding the psychology that creates successful investment outcomes. Most people approach investing emotionally. They buy investments that feel exciting. They sell investments that make them anxious. And they make decisions based on what investments have done recently, rather than what they're likely to do in the future. This emotional approach to investing virtually guarantees poor results because markets are designed to exploit emotional decision-making. Wealthy people approach investing systematically. They have clear criteria for what makes a good investment. They follow consistent processes for evaluating opportunities, and they make decisions based on long-term probabilities rather than short-term emotions. This systematic approach allows them to make rational decisions, even when markets are behaving irrationally. The first psychological principle wealthy people understand about investing is that successful investing is about buying businesses, not buying stocks. When most people buy stocks, they are focused on price movements, chart patterns, and market sentiment. When wealthy people buy stocks, they are focused on business fundamentals, competitive advantages, and long-term growth potential. This business-focused approach eliminates much of the anxiety and speculation that plague most investors. Instead of worrying about daily price fluctuations, they focus on whether the underlying businesses are becoming more valuable over time. Instead of trying to predict short-term market movements, they focus on identifying businesses that will be worth more in the future than they are today. This business perspective also changes how they think about market volatility. Most people see volatility as risk and try to avoid it. Wealthy people see volatility as opportunity and try to capitalize on it. They understand that volatility is the price you pay for superior long-term returns, and that trying to avoid all volatility guarantees inferior returns. When markets are volatile, business values don't change as rapidly as stock prices. This creates opportunities to buy good businesses at prices below their intrinsic value and sell them at prices above their intrinsic value. Wealthy investors position themselves to take advantage of these opportunities rather than being paralyzed by them. Another crucial psychological principle wealthy people understand is the concept of investment temperament. They recognize that successful investing requires specific psychological characteristics, and they work to develop those characteristics rather than just focusing on investment knowledge. The most important investment temperament characteristic is patience. Wealth creation through investing happens over years and decades, not days and weeks. Most people lack the patience for true wealth-building investments because they want immediate feedback and quick returns. Wealthy people have trained themselves to think in decades rather than quarters. They understand that the best investment opportunities often take years to mature, and that premature selling is one of the biggest destroyers of investment wealth. This long-term temperament allows them to make investment decisions that would be impossible for people who need immediate gratification. They can buy businesses that are temporarily unpopular but have strong long-term prospects. They can hold investments through temporary downturns because they're focused on long-term value creation rather than short-term price movements. The second crucial temperament characteristic is emotional stability. Investing involves constant uncertainty and frequent temporary losses. People who are emotionally reactive to these normal aspects of investing make poor decisions that destroy wealth over time. Wealthy people develop emotional stability through understanding, preparation, and practice. They understand that temporary losses are normal and expected in successful investing. They prepare for volatility by diversifying appropriately and never investing money they might need in the short term. They practice emotional regulation techniques that allow them to remain calm during market turbulence. The third crucial temperament characteristic is independent thinking. Markets are social systems where crowd psychology often drives prices away from fundamental values. People who follow the crowd buy when prices are high and sell when prices are low, which guarantees poor results. Wealthy people have trained themselves to think independently about investment opportunities. They base their decisions on their own analysis rather than market sentiment, media coverage, or social pressure. This independent thinking allows them to buy when others are selling and sell when others are buying. But perhaps the most important psychological principle wealthy people understand about investing is the concept of asymmetric risk. This means looking for investments where the potential upside is much larger than the potential downside, regardless of the probability of success. Most people focus on the probability of success when evaluating investments. Wealthy people focus on the magnitude of success relative to the magnitude of failure. They would rather make 10 investments where they could lose $1 each, but make $50 on the winners, than make one investment where they're likely to make $5, but could lose $10. This asymmetric thinking leads them to make investment decisions that seem counterintuitive to most people. They're willing to accept lower probability investments if the reward-to-risk ratio is favorable. They're willing to make many small investments that might fail if the few that succeed can generate outsized returns. This approach requires developing comfort with being wrong frequently, as long as you're spectacularly right occasionally. Most people can't psychologically handle being wrong most of the time, even if it leads to better overall results. They prefer being right frequently even if it leads to inferior returns. Wealthy people have learned to separate their ego from their investment results. They don't need to be right about every investment to feel competent. They measure success based on overall portfolio performance rather than individual investment performance. Another sophisticated psychological principle wealthy people apply to investing is barbell positioning. This means structuring their investments to minimize catastrophic risk while maximizing upside potential. They put most of their money in very safe investments and a small portion in very high-risk, high-reward investments. This barbell approach provides psychological benefits as well as financial benefits. The safe portion of their portfolio ensures they can sleep well at night and maintain their lifestyle regardless of what happens to their speculative investments. The speculative portion provides exposure to unlimited upside potential without risking their financial security. This structure eliminates the psychological stress that comes from having your entire financial future dependent on risky investments, while still providing exposure to the wealth creation potential that comes from taking calculated risks. Wealthy people also understand the psychological principle of position sizing. The idea that the amount you invest in any opportunity should be proportional to your confidence in the opportunity and your ability to withstand loss of that amount. Most people make binary investment decisions. They either invest or they don't. Wealthy people make graduated investment decisions. They invest different amounts based on their conviction level and the asymmetric risk profile of each opportunity. This graduated approach allows them to participate in many more opportunities because they don't have to be certain about any single opportunity. They can invest small amounts in many uncertain opportunities while investing larger amounts in opportunities they understand better. The psychological benefit of position sizing is that it eliminates the paralysis that comes from trying to make perfect investment decisions. You don't have to be certain about an investment to participate in it. You just have to size your position appropriately for your level of certainty. But the most advanced psychological tool wealthy people use in investing is what we call probabilistic thinking. Instead of trying to predict what will happen, they think in terms of probability distributions and expected values across many possible outcomes. Most people try to predict the future when making investment decisions. They want to know what the stock market will do next year, what interest rates will be, or what a specific company's earnings will be. This prediction-based approach leads to overconfidence and poor decision-making because the future is inherently unpredictable. Wealthy people accept uncertainty as a fundamental aspect of investing. Instead of trying to predict specific outcomes, they think about ranges of possible outcomes and the probability of each outcome. This probabilistic thinking allows them to make good decisions even when they can't predict exactly what will happen. This approach requires developing comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity. Most people are psychologically uncomfortable with uncertainty and try to create false certainty through predictions and forecasts. Wealthy people have learned to be comfortable with uncertainty and make decisions that work well across multiple possible futures. The probabilistic approach also changes how they think about investment mistakes. Instead of viewing unexpected outcomes as errors in judgment, they view them as normal variations in a probabilistic system. This perspective prevents the emotional devastation that comes from being wrong about specific predictions. Another crucial aspect of investment psychology that wealthy people master is understanding market cycles and positioning themselves appropriately for different phases of those cycles. They understand that markets move in predictable psychological patterns, even though the timing and magnitude of those patterns are unpredictable. During market euphoria, they become more cautious and focus on preserving capital. During market despair, they become more aggressive and focus on acquiring assets at discounted prices. This contrarian approach requires strong psychological discipline because it means doing the opposite of what feels emotionally comfortable. When everyone else is excited about investments and prices are high, it feels wrong to be cautious. When everyone else is fearful about investments and prices are low, it feels wrong to be aggressive. Wealthy people have trained themselves to act rationally rather than emotionally during these extreme market conditions. This cyclical thinking also helps them maintain perspective during both good and bad market periods. They understand that good times don't last forever, and they prepare for downturns during good times. They understand that bad times don't last forever, and they position for recovery during bad times. The final psychological principle that gives wealthy people an investing advantage is their understanding of opportunity cost. Every investment decision is simultaneously a decision not to make other investments. Wealthy people evaluate investments not just based on their absolute returns, but based on their returns relative to other available opportunities. This opportunity cost thinking prevents them from holding on to mediocre investments just because they're profitable. If they can identify better opportunities, they're willing to sell good investments to buy better investments. This continuous optimization of their investment portfolio compounds into significantly better results over time. Most people evaluate investments in isolation rather than relative to other opportunities. They hold on to investments that are making money even when they could be making more money in different investments. This failure to optimize for opportunity cost significantly reduces their wealth creation potential. When you master the investment psychology principles that wealthy people use, you'll be able to make investment decisions that compound into significant wealth over time. You'll avoid the emotional traps that destroy most people's investment returns, and you'll position yourself to benefit from the market inefficiencies that emotional decision-making creates. This brings us to our next psychological cheat code: how wealthy people think about business creation and entrepreneurship, which involves psychological frameworks that most people never develop. Chapter 12: The Entrepreneurial Mindset Shift. If you want to understand how wealthy people create wealth at an accelerated rate, you need to understand how they think about business and entrepreneurship. While most people think of business as risky and entrepreneurship as gambling, wealthy people understand that business creation is the most predictable and scalable way to build wealth when approached with the right psychological frameworks. Most people have been programmed to think of employment as safe and entrepreneurship as risky. This programming creates a psychological framework where you trade time for money at a predetermined rate, rely on someone else for your income security, and limit your earning potential to what one person can produce individually. Wealthy people understand that employment is actually the riskiest financial strategy because you have no control over your income security, no ownership of the value you create, and no leverage for exponential income growth. They see entrepreneurship as the safest long-term financial strategy because it gives you control over your income, ownership of the value you create, and unlimited leverage for wealth creation. This fundamental shift in how you think about business risk versus employment risk changes everything about your approach to wealth creation. Instead of seeking security through dependence on others, you create security through developing your own value creation capabilities. The first psychological principle wealthy people understand about business is that business is fundamentally about solving problems for other people. The bigger the problems you solve and the more people you solve them for, the wealthier you become. This problem-solving perspective eliminates the confusion that keeps most people from starting businesses. Most people think of business as selling products or services, which creates a psychological framework focused on what they have to offer rather than what other people need. This self-focused approach makes it difficult to identify viable business opportunities and create offerings that people actually want to buy. Wealthy people approach business from a market-focused perspective. They study what problems people have, what solutions they're willing to pay for, and what gaps exist between current solutions and ideal solutions. This market focus makes it much easier to identify business opportunities and create successful businesses. This problem-solving approach also changes how they think about competition. Most people see competition as a threat and try to avoid competitive markets. Wealthy people see competition as validation that a market exists and that people are willing to pay for solutions to specific problems. When you understand that business is about problem solving, competition becomes information about market demand rather than a barrier to entry. The presence of successful competitors proves that people will pay for solutions to specific problems, which makes it easier to evaluate business opportunities. Another crucial psychological principle wealthy people understand is that business success comes from creating systems rather than just working hard. Most people think of business as trading time for money at a higher rate than employment, which limits their wealth creation potential to their individual productivity. Wealthy people understand that true business success comes from creating systems that generate value without their constant involvement. They focus on building processes, teams, and technologies that can serve customers and generate income even when they're not personally involved in day-to-day operations. This systems thinking approach requires a fundamental psychological shift from doing work to designing work. Instead of focusing on how to do tasks more efficiently, you focus on how to create systems that eliminate the need for you to do those tasks personally. This shift is psychologically challenging because it requires giving up control over specific tasks in exchange for control over overall outcomes. You have to become comfortable with other people handling important aspects of your business, which requires developing trust, communication skills, and leadership capabilities. But the psychological payoff of systems thinking is enormous because it creates the possibility of passive income and scalable wealth creation. Once you've built effective systems, your income can grow without proportional increases in your time investment. The third psychological principle wealthy people understand about business is the concept of value arbitrage, identifying situations where you can create more value for customers than it costs you to deliver that value and capturing a portion of that value difference as profit. Most people think of business as buying low and selling high, which creates a zero-sum mindset where your profit comes at someone else's expense. This zero-sum thinking makes business feel unethical and creates psychological resistance to wealth creation through business. Wealthy people understand that successful business creates win-win situations where customers receive more value than they pay for, and businesses capture a portion of the value they create. This positive sum thinking makes business feel ethical and purposeful rather than exploitative. This value arbitrage approach requires developing what economists call value intuition, the ability to recognize situations where significant value can be created for customers profitably. This intuition is developed through studying customer needs, understanding value chains, and analyzing successful business models. Value intuition allows wealthy people to identify business opportunities that others miss because they can see value creation possibilities that aren't obvious to people who don't understand how value is created and captured in different markets. But perhaps the most important psychological principle wealthy people understand about business is the concept of entrepreneurial leverage. This means using business to multiply your personal capabilities rather than just monetizing your personal capabilities. Most people who start businesses essentially create jobs for themselves. They trade time for money at a higher rate than employment, but they're still limited by their personal time and energy. This approach creates higher income but not true wealth. Wealthy people use business to create entrepreneurial leverage through several mechanisms. They leverage other people's time by building teams. They leverage other people's money by raising capital or using financing. They leverage other people's expertise by partnering with specialists, and they leverage technology to automate processes. This entrepreneurial leverage creates the possibility of exponential rather than linear wealth creation. Instead of being limited to what one person can produce, you can create value through systems that involve multiple people, utilize capital efficiently, and scale beyond individual limitations. The psychological shift required for entrepreneurial leverage is moving from individual contributor to orchestra conductor. Instead of trying to play all the instruments yourself, You focus on coordinating multiple specialists to create symphonic results. This shift requires developing leadership skills, delegation capabilities, and strategic thinking abilities. You have to become comfortable with being responsible for outcomes without controlling every detail of how those outcomes are achieved. Another sophisticated psychological principle wealthy people apply to business is market timing intelligence. This means understanding not just what problems to solve, but when to solve them for maximum impact and profitability. Most people approach business with a build it and they will come mentality. They create solutions to problems they understand without considering whether the market is ready for those solutions. This timing blindness leads to many business failures that could have been successes with better timing. Wealthy people study market cycles, technology adoption curves, regulatory changes, and social trends to identify when specific business opportunities are most likely to succeed. They understand that timing can be more important than product quality in determining business success. This market timing intelligence requires developing what we call pattern recognition for business opportunities. You learn to recognize the conditions that create favorable timing for different types of businesses and position yourself to capitalize on those conditions when they arise. Pattern recognition is developed through studying business history, analyzing successful companies, and understanding the factors that create market opportunities. The more patterns you recognize, the better you become at identifying optimal timing for business opportunities. But the most advanced psychological tool wealthy people use in business is systematic experimentation. Instead of betting everything on one business idea, they create portfolios of small experiments that test different business concepts with minimal risk and maximum learning potential. Most people approach business with a perfectionist mentality. They try to develop complete business plans, create perfect products, and launch fully formed businesses. This perfectionist approach requires large investments of time and money before you know whether the business concept will work. Wealthy people approach business with an experimentation mentality. They create minimal viable products, test core assumptions with real customers, and iterate based on market feedback. This experimental approach allows them to test many business ideas quickly and cheaply while learning what works and what doesn't. This experimental mindset requires developing comfort with uncertainty and failure. You have to be willing to launch imperfect products, receive negative feedback, and pivot when experiments don't work as expected. But the psychological benefit of systematic experimentation is that it eliminates the paralysis that comes from trying to predict business success in advance. You don't have to be certain about a business idea to test it. You just have to be curious about whether it might work. The compound effect of systematic experimentation is that you learn business principles that apply across multiple ventures. Each experiment teaches you something about customer behavior, market dynamics, or business operations that improves your ability to create successful businesses in the future. Another crucial aspect of entrepreneurial psychology that wealthy people master is understanding the relationship between business and personal development. They recognize that business success requires continuous personal growth, and they use business challenges as opportunities to develop capabilities they couldn't develop any other way. Business forces you to develop leadership skills, decision-making abilities, stress management techniques, and interpersonal capabilities that are valuable far beyond business contexts. Wealthy people embrace these development opportunities rather than avoiding the personal challenges that business creates. This personal development approach to business makes the entrepreneurial journey valuable regardless of specific business outcomes. Even if a particular business doesn't generate significant wealth, the capabilities you develop while building it increase your potential for future wealth creation. The final psychological principle that gives wealthy people an entrepreneurial advantage is their understanding of business model innovation. They don't just create new products or services. They create new ways of creating, delivering, and capturing value that give them competitive advantages. Most people focus on product innovation, creating better products than existing alternatives. Wealthy people focus on business model innovation, creating better ways to serve customers and generate profits than existing approaches. Business model innovation often creates more sustainable competitive advantages than product innovation because business models are harder to copy than products. A unique way of creating and delivering value can protect your market position even when competitors copy your products. This business model thinking requires understanding the entire value chain from customer problem identification through value delivery and profit capture. You analyze how value flows through different business models and identify opportunities to create superior value delivery systems. When you master the entrepreneurial psychology principles that wealthy people use, you'll be able to create businesses that generate wealth at an accelerated rate while providing genuine value to customers and society. You'll avoid the perfectionist traps that prevent most people from starting businesses, and you'll develop the systematic approaches that create predictable business success. This brings us to our final and most important psychological framework: how to integrate all these mental models into a complete wealth creation psychology that transforms not just your financial results, but your entire relationship with success, money, and life itself. Chapter 13: The Ultimate Integration. You now possess the psychological cheat codes that wealthy people have used for generations to create and maintain extraordinary wealth. You understand how they think about scarcity and abundance, risk and opportunity, leverage and compound effects. You know their frameworks for emotional regulation, social dynamics, and systematic value creation. But knowledge without integration is powerless, and integration without action is worthless. The final psychological principle that separates those who merely understand wealth psychology from those who actually build wealth is what we call systematic implementation. This means creating a personal system that ensures you consistently apply these psychological frameworks until they become automatic patterns of thinking and acting. Most people who learn about wealth psychology make the mistake of trying to implement everything at once. They get excited about the possibilities, attempt to change all their mental patterns simultaneously, and quickly become overwhelmed by the complexity of transformation. This all-or-nothing approach leads to abandonment of the entire system within weeks or months. Wealthy people understand that psychological transformation happens through consistent application of new mental patterns over time. They choose one or two psychological frameworks to focus on initially, practice those frameworks until they become habitual, then gradually integrate additional frameworks into their mental operating system. This systematic approach to psychological change requires what we call implementation discipline. You have to resist the temptation to try everything immediately and instead focus on mastering one psychological framework at a time. You have to be patient with the process of mental transformation while maintaining faith that consistent application will create compound results. The first step in systematic implementation is conducting what we call a psychological audit of your current mental patterns around money and wealth. You need to identify which limiting beliefs, emotional reactions, and thought patterns are currently sabotaging your wealth creation efforts. This audit requires radical honesty about your current psychological relationship with money. What emotions do you feel when you think about wealth? What beliefs do you hold about rich people? What fears arise when you consider taking financial risks? What stories do you tell yourself about why wealth creation is difficult or impossible for you? Once you've identified your current psychological patterns, you can choose which patterns to replace first. The most effective approach is to start with the psychological framework that will have the greatest immediate impact on your financial decision-making. For most people, this is either the scarcity to abundance mindset shift or the emotional regulation frameworks. The second step is creating what we call psychological practice routines, daily habits that reinforce new mental patterns until they become automatic. Just as you wouldn't expect to develop physical fitness without consistent exercise, you can't expect to develop wealth psychology without consistent mental practice. These practice routines might include daily visualization of abundant thinking, regular analysis of investment opportunities using rational frameworks, systematic networking activities that build social capital, or consistent business experimentation that develops entrepreneurial capabilities. The key is making these psychological practices as consistent and automatic as brushing your teeth or eating breakfast. You want to integrate wealth psychology practice into your daily routine so that it happens regardless of your motivation, energy level, or current circumstances. The third step is creating accountability systems that ensure you maintain psychological discipline over time. Psychological transformation is difficult, and without external accountability, most people revert to their old mental patterns when faced with stress, uncertainty, or setbacks. This accountability might come from joining groups of like-minded individuals who are also developing wealth psychology, working with mentors or coaches who can monitor your psychological development, or creating measurement systems that track your progress in applying these mental frameworks. The most sophisticated wealthy people create what we call psychological boards of directors, small groups of trusted advisors who understand wealth psychology and can provide feedback on their thinking patterns, decision-making processes, and psychological development over time. But perhaps the most important aspect of successful implementation is understanding that psychological transformation is not linear. You will have periods of rapid progress followed by periods of apparent stagnation. You will experience setbacks where you revert to old mental patterns. You will face situations that challenge your new psychological frameworks. These challenges are not failures. They're normal parts of the transformation process. Wealthy people expect psychological transformation to be difficult and prepare for the inevitable obstacles that arise when changing deeply ingrained mental patterns. They develop what we call transformation resilience, the ability to maintain their psychological development efforts even when progress seems slow or when they experience temporary setbacks. This resilience comes from understanding that psychological change happens in layers, with each layer of development creating a foundation for deeper transformation. The compound effect of systematic psychological development is that you gradually become a different type of person, someone who naturally thinks and acts in ways that create wealth rather than repel it. Your new mental patterns become so automatic that you don't have to consciously think about applying wealth psychology. It becomes your natural way of processing financial situations. This psychological transformation creates what we call wealth magnetism, a quality that wealthy people possess where opportunities, resources, and successful people are naturally attracted to them. This isn't mystical. It's the natural result of consistently thinking and acting in ways that create value for others while positioning yourself advantageously within social and economic systems. When you've successfully integrated these psychological frameworks, you'll find that wealth creation becomes easier and more natural than wealth struggling. You'll make decisions that consistently move you toward greater financial success. You'll attract opportunities that others don't even notice. You'll develop capabilities that compound into extraordinary results over time. But the ultimate goal of developing wealth psychology isn't just financial success. It's psychological freedom. The ability to make choices based on what you want to create rather than what you're afraid to lose. It's the confidence that comes from knowing you can create value in any situation. It's the peace of mind that comes from understanding how money and wealth actually work. Most importantly, it's the ability to use wealth as a tool for creating the life you want while contributing value to others. When you truly master wealth psychology, money becomes a servant rather than a master, a means to an end rather than an end in itself. The wealthy people who have shared these psychological frameworks with you through this content understand something that most people never realize. True wealth isn't about having money. It's about having the psychological capabilities that create money consistently over time. Money can be lost, but psychological capabilities last forever and can recreate wealth in any circumstances. As you begin implementing these psychological frameworks, remember that you're not just learning techniques for making money. You're developing mental patterns that will serve you throughout your entire life in every situation that requires strategic thinking, emotional regulation, or systematic problem solving. The psychology of wealth is ultimately the psychology of effectiveness, the mental frameworks that allow you to create the results you want in any area of life. These same psychological principles that create financial success also create success in relationships, health, creativity, and personal fulfillment. But transformation requires action, and action requires decision. Right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can treat this information as entertainment, consuming it passively without changing anything about how you think or act. Or you can treat this information as education, actively implementing these psychological frameworks until they transform your financial reality. The wealthy people whose psychological secrets you've learned made their choice long ago. They chose transformation over entertainment, implementation over information, and systematic development over hopeful waiting. They chose to think differently, even when it was uncomfortable, to act boldly, even when it was uncertain, and to persist consistently, even when progress was slow. Now it's your turn to choose. Will you join the small percentage of people who actually apply what they learn about wealth psychology? Will you do the difficult work of transforming your mental patterns, even when it challenges everything you've believed about money? Will you persist with psychological development, even when the results aren't immediately visible? Your financial future depends entirely on the choice you make right now. Everything you've learned about the psychology of wealth is useless unless you apply it systematically and consistently over time. But if you do apply it, if you commit to developing the psychological frameworks that create wealth, your financial reality will transform in ways that currently seem impossible. The cheat codes are now yours. The question is, what will you do with them? The wealthy are waiting to see if you'll join their ranks, not through luck or inheritance, but through developing the psychological mastery that creates wealth consistently and ethically. They're waiting to see if you'll stop thinking like everyone else and start thinking like them. The choice is yours. The time is now. Your wealthy future is waiting for your decision. Choose wisely. Choose boldly. Choose now. Because everything you want is on the other side of the psychological transformation you've been avoiding your entire life. And that transformation begins with a single decision to stop consuming information and start implementing it. The psychology cheat codes rich people don't want you to know are no longer secret. Now, the only question is whether you have the psychological courage to use them. Your answer to that question will determine everything about your financial future. Choose the answer that creates the life you actually want rather than the life you're settling for. The wealthy are waiting. Your future self is waiting. The only person who can make this choice is you. Make it now.